Hello, and welcome back to Pushing Cardboard. I'm Grant Lindenberg, your cardboard pusher, and this is episode 7, The Last 100 Swords. Today's episode. Just when I was not sure what to dive into next, a game arrived that I'd backed a few months ago and I'd totally forgotten about. I think maybe Carl Paradis had recommended it to me when I interviewed him. In any case, the game is Swords Around the Throne by Renaud Verlac. And it's a grand strategic Napoleonic game running all the way from 1805 to 1815. As well, we'll take a look at The Last 100 Yards, a very different sort of World War II tactical game from most in that very crowded field. That should fill us up quite nicely. I want to thank everyone who commented on the previous episode. A few folks commented that they appreciated the depth of the dive into the Stalingrad game. I appreciate that. Let me know what depth you prefer. This time it's almost as deep, but not quite. But I make up for it with 2 games instead of 1 this episode. In terms of what's news and what I've been up to, I guess in terms of news, there was that big dump of games from GMT last month. If you're a P500 backer, you would have noticed this. Whatever production line problems or supply chain problems GMT had been having. Finally, some of it was resolved, and the bottleneck was eased up a little bit, and a lot of folks got a dump of quite a few new games. I got a few of them myself. So online, I've seen a lot of plays lately of Salerno 43 already. I've given it a try myself solo for a few turns, and I've seen a few folks starting Vietnam 65 to 75. But the one I'm seeing the most of really is Pacific War. That was seems like a lot of folks were really looking forward to that game coming back. Unfortunately, it's also engendered the most whining, it seems to me. There's like a handful of problems in the I think there's like 1,200 plus counters in the game, and just a few of them have a few problems. Mark Herman online has said you don't even really need the ones that are in error, but that you can, you can play everything that's in the box without even really needing them, or you can correct them yourselves, or wait and replacements will be available via C3I magazine, as often is the case. But this isn't enough for some folks who complain about having to buy a magazine they don't want, or some others who demand that GMT immediately ship out replacement counters for free, which whatever. Another guy I saw, he was outraged that the ship counters weren't the actual ship silhouettes, despite the fact that the ships don't even appear on the board. They're just in off-board task force displays. I don't know. Some people grumble that they've had 35 years or more to get this game right, kind of ignoring the fact that the game hasn't been in publication for most of those 35 years, and this version is a new version from a completely new publisher. It's not the old publisher, so of course there's going to be some slight glitches as they try to publish for what is for them an entirely new game. I mean, I get it, it's a pricey game, but errors happen, and nothing here seems to be game breaking. I know it's going to make me sound like Grandpa again, but I mean, back in the day, we were happy to get a notice of the corrected values for a game in either the General or the S&T magazine, and then we wrote them on the counters in pen. Getting replacement counters via C3A magazine still feels like an absolute bonus to me. Anyway, I don't know, maybe if you're one of the completely outraged and upset people, drop me a line, let me know why I've got it all wrong. In other news, have you heard about the giant Shores of Tripoli online tournament? Fort Circle Games, they've put together this huge online tourney with players using the online implementation of their game found at the Rally the Troops website. Seems to be a huge success so far as of the recording date here. I think they're through the first couple of rounds of the tournament. And it just seems like what a great idea to pump up interest and excitement about your new game. I really wish I'd have signed up for it, but I'm about to go into sort of double duty for work for about a month, so I wasn't sure if I was going to have I was going to be able to commit enough time to it. But kudos to the people over at Fort Circle Games. What a great idea, and everybody seems to be like diving in regardless of their level of experience and having a good time. As for what's on my table lately, a lot of the same stuff that I've been playing PBM. Lots of commands and colors as always. Got games still of Ancients, Napoleon, Tricorn, and Samurai. Still lots of ASL. Getting started on a new Russian-Italian scenario. Made a kind of a stupid mistake. Didn't set up my MMG in the available steeple, which is really going to cost me. I mean, I should have at least had a half squad up there just to strip concealment as my opponent enters. But mistakes are made. Still also playing the Hell's Highway campaign game from the Lone Canuck Publishing. I've immobilized or eliminated all of his opening Panthers, and he's toasted all my Shermans except for my one Firefly, and he currently owns about 80% of the map. So here's we're near done the first day, so I'm really hoping that things even out by giving me more buy points for him than the next date. But I haven't really looked ahead in the scenario book to find out if that's the case. I hope so. Still playing Unhappy King Charles. Damn Scots keep popping up across my northern border and terrorizing me. Still playing Nemesis Burma 1944. I'm playing the Allies in that one and really getting my butt kicked. But as always, it's a good experience. It's such a great game. We're in the final third of Imperial Struggle, and as I've mentioned before, I think I don't know that my opponent is going to be up for another rematch of that, and I'll be happy to move on to something else as well. I've said before that I think that game's very fiddly, and that the Vassal implementation is maybe a little easier to deal with than all the counters you have to have when you play the cardboard version. But it's very fiddly on Vassal as well. There's just I don't know, that map is so big. I've got a fairly decent sized monitor, but I'm always scrolling around trying to find what I'm looking for. And yeah, I don't know. It's a fiddly game. Anyway, also still playing Corregidor, Return to the Rock, and Stalingrad, Verdun on the Volga, two Mike Ranella games. Still enjoying both of those. And zipping through Undaunted Normandy, we've just had a couple of scenarios where we introduced first snipers and then mortars. That's been a blast. The ongoing Combat Commander Europe games. I'm getting spanked in that one as well. But I think we've played 5 or 6 scenarios, me and my partner there, and I think I'm giving as good as I get. I just happen to be really taking it on the chin in this particular scenario. And finally playing a scenario from Last 100 Yards, the Airborne Over Europe module. I think it's scenario 13, 23. I don't know. Who knows? Anyway, it's that system works really well for PBM as well. A lot of people think tactical games aren't good for play by email, but I've never had a problem with ASL email, and even less so with Last 100 Yards. It's just got a very different opportunity fire system. I'll talk about it later, but it works great over email. As for new games this month, just a bit compared to the big dump last month. Of course, I got the Swords Around the Throne game that I mentioned that I'll be discussing in some detail. I got that off of a pre-order and that I'd sort of forgot about, so that was nice. Same thing from, I think it was Compass Games. I got War for America. That's Gilbert Collins' new game on the American Revolution. I think it takes, it's sort of, it's kind of from the point of view of the British rather than the colonials, the colonists, for a change of pace. And Red Flag Over Paris. I just went out and bought that one. I'd heard the interview with the designer, Fred Serval, on the History on the Table podcast, and it got me so interested in that game, I decided to forget about my general aversion to short games, and yeah, I can't wait to play that one as well. So lots of new stuff that we'll get to in time, but right away let's get to Swords Around the Throne. That's the first game up this episode. So this is a new game designed by Renaud Verlac. The publishing company is My Kind of Games. I'm not sure, but I wouldn't be surprised if that's Renault's own self-publishing company. I don't know of any other games published by them, or well, I don't know anything about it. But so he's a designer of Age of Napoleon. That's a very popular grand strategic game of the Napoleonic Wars. So he's got a fair bit of experience in this space. I've only played Age of Napoleon once solo, so I can't really compare on it or contrast it to this new game. I know that the designer says that Swords Around the Throne is at an even higher level than Age of Napoleon. Here you're the head of state or the commander-in-chief rather than a general or a marshal. From what I understand, the goal of the new game is to be simpler and yet deeper, and I don't know, perhaps diplomacy plays a bit of a larger role. I know that it doesn't really, it's not supposed to be really similar to Age of Napoleon. It's definitely its own thing. If you want to look at get a peek at the components, head over to pushingcardboard.com and look for my unboxing video. I'll put a link in the show notes here. But I did a quick unboxing of to have a look at the pieces of this game. It's beautiful. The mounted maps, just a modest, basically about 2 feet by 2 feet, showing all of Europe and into Russia. It's a point map with I think maybe just 23 locations, 25 locations, something like that. So that means Russia has 5 spaces, France 3, Spain 2, etc. We're not looking at a big game of maneuver here. And also on the map, there's a few tracks and a display to indicate the diplomatic status of each major and minor power. The counters are large and laser cut. They're not plentiful because it's not that sort of a game. The armies and leaders are basically 1-inch pre-rounded squares. There's 5 leader counters and 24 armies. And there's also 33 round diplomatic status markers. And then there's a few other markers for game turn and stuff like that. So it's not counter heavy, and the map is simple and point to point. And then finally, there's a deck of cards for each player. They're really great looking cards, and they're illustrated with what appears to be details from period paintings. I'm not sure if they're all period, but that's the general vibe or the aesthetic they're going for here, and they look great. And then there's just a few game symbols on each card, but the symbols are large, easy to read, but they at the same time they don't ruin the image on the cards. It's great art design here. And finally, each player gets to have a two-page player aid. I'm not going to go into real depth here on the gameplay. I'll do a little bit, but as I've only played a few turns. But I can't really, comment as to strategy or how well it all holds together over the course of a game. But hopefully I can give you a bit of a sense of how things work. It's a bit of a deck builder. Each player secretly chooses 15 cards out of their deck to start their deck with. Their deck size can be increased later through successful diplomacy. There's a few restrictions based on which scenario you're playing and what countries are allied to you or subjugated to you, and that means a few of those 15 cards are mandatory. You have to take so many French cards, so many Russian cards, etc. As well, there's a maximum number of cards you can take from each nation as the cards. Each of the cards in your initial deck they relate to either a major or minor power. So you pick your first 15 cards, and then each player shuffles that deck of 15 and deals themselves half the deck of cards rounded up. So each player starts with 8 cards, And from there, you'll have your hand of 8 cards, and each player has to play his first 2 or 3 cards each turn face down, and these are in a certain order. So basically, you're having to play 2 or 3 cards out in front of you ahead of the time of when you're going to be able to play them, because you're gonna put cards 1 and 2 and maybe 3 out, and then you're going to have to play card 1, and after you do the effects of that, you'll add another card face down at space 3 or 4. So there's always a couple of cards that you're committed to playing before you've seen the outcome of your current card, which is I think one of the key details of how this plays. Basically, after each card is played, you draw another and play another, draw another and play another face down. So given that it's out past the 2 that are still face down in front of you, so you're always planning with 1 or 2 card plays ahead at all times. Anyway, at this point, you're ready to start the action. Each player reveals their first face down card. The cards each have a priority number and a little icon on them, or multiple icons, indicating possible actions. The actions fall into 3 types: diplomatic, insurgency, and campaign actions. Whoever has the lowest priority card goes first. Diplomacy always goes before insurgency, which is always before campaigning. But there's also a 4th type of card called opportunity, which function a bit like a wild card, and they always get to go first, and they always have their choice of actions. As well, each card has a nationality symbol on it, which restricts your use to that nationality. So if you're the Allies and you play a diplomacy card that has the Russian symbol on it, then you have to do Russian diplomacy with it, obviously. So anyway, this brings us to the heart of the game. Each major and minor power is always in a defined diplomatic state vis-a-vis the French versus the coalition. The states range from French dominion to French ally to French subjugated power to neutral, and then from there on the other side to coalition subjugated or coalition member. Trying to change the status to get more minor and major powers aligned to you or aligned to you more tightly is the basis for victory in this game. So, we've laid out our starting cards, we've flipped the first over, we've compared priorities, and we've determined who goes first using one type of the 3 allowable actions: diplomatic, insurgency, or campaign. With a diplomatic action, you target another power. There's a few restrictions on which diplomatic statuses the other power is in that can be targeted, but it's all pretty straightforward. You can try and pull an enemy farther towards neutrality. You can try and pull a neutral towards you, or you can try and strengthen an ally that you already have. As well, you'll need very little in order to influence a minor power, but you'll need a lot more to influence a major power, and even more to influence an enemy-controlled major power. The strength of your attempt is based on the strength of the card you played, adjacent friendly or enemy armies in the case of trying to influence minor powers, and then you also get to both have a chance to play another card from your hand just to try to influence the number a little more. As long as your number, as long as the ending number of all these factors ends up being as much as needed to shift you in the direction you were trying to make things go, you're successful. If you're trying an insurgency action, that lets you target a few other types of diplomatic statuses that weren't available to be targeted by a diplomatic action. The coalition can target French dominions this way and French subjugated powers, while the French can only target a special status called a quagmire that crops up during gameplay. The card play is similar to the diplomatic actions, but obviously the modifiers are different. There's some extra effects, such as Napoleon being moved back to France if an insurgency is successfully started there. So basically, insurgencies work in terms of trying to change those statuses as well. Just they let you target different types of statuses. And then finally, there's the campaign actions, and these are a little more diverse. You have a few more choices of what you might do. They can be used to muster new armies and new leaders. That's pretty much like it sounds. They can be used to move armies and leaders, and of course to initiate combat. And again, there's pluses and minuses, DRMs. Well, not DRMs. There's no dice here, but there's pluses and minuses for the numbers of armies that are attacking, the numbers of armies defending, armies in adjacent spaces. And again, just like the other two, cards can be played from the hand to add to your total numbers. And this is obviously another way to affect the status of a opposing, well, a neutral or an opposing minor or major. In that, if you're successful, you're going to be able to perhaps subjugate them or get them allied onto your side by conquering them. After each player takes their actions for that round, they draw a new card and then they play that new card face down. As I said before, out past whatever's still face down, up to a limit of 6 total face down cards for each player. Each year is 6 cards for each player, so 12 total plays. After each player has played each of their 6 cards and resolved all of that, the year is over, and then there's a winter's quarters phase. Any diplomatic statuses that changed last turn were probably marked as locked. That's a little special status that keeps it so that a status of a minor or major power can only change once per turn. So once it changes, it gets locked, and you can't try and change it again in a turn. Anyway, during winter quarters, those locks are removed. Supply is checked. That's fairly straightforward. The turn markers advanced, and we do it all over again with another round of deck building and drawing again. The campaign game is 11 turns long, from 1805 to 1815. But the game gives you a variety of different start years, as well as different victory conditions for different end years. If you don't want to go all the way from 1805 to 1815, you can start in most of the different years along the way and end in most of the different years along the way. So your starting forces and your victory conditions will change depending on what you want. But that lets you choose as short or as long a game as you like. It makes this the experience really flexible. There's no advanced rules here. There's just one regular game. There's 3 optional rules, though you'll never use all 3 together. You might use 2 of the 3 at any one time. There's not a lot in the way provided in the way of historical notes, but a nice bibliography and even nicer, a nice set of design notes where Renaud Verlac explains what he was trying to accomplish as well as what he thinks of the current crop of card-driven games and how he was trying to improve on that. It's a really terrific looking package. I really look forward to playing this one opposed, as that's the only way to really get a grip on how good of a game it is. There is already a vassal module, so hopefully that's going to happen soon. Once I have a few real games under my belt, I'll probably do a real review on my YouTube channel, if not here on the podcast. I think I don't have much to quibble with about this game. I think my only quibble with the physical copy is it's kind of got a strange box top that only comes halfway down. The lid kind of is only half as deep as the full box top. It feels like the box lid could come off more easily than a regular lid. I don't know. I think it's meant to make the lid look fancy, like a real swanky box of chocolates or something. But it just looks like it's going to come loose to me. So anyway, that's a small quibble indeed. Okay. So much for Swords Around the Throne. I'm going to try and squeeze in another game, as it might be another 5 or 6 weeks until I have time for another podcast. So here goes. Let's talk about another one. Normally, when I do 2 games in an episode, I try to do one newer game and one older game, because I still have a fondness for a lot of older games. But I'm doing 2 newer games this weekend, or this time, because I don't know, just because one just came in over the transom, and this other one's been on my mind a lot because me and my PEBM opponent have reignited our game and have really been head deep in it. That game is The Last 100 Yards by Mike Denson from GMT Games. It's another World War II tactical game, but if you played Squad Leader, ASL, Company of Heroes, any of those sorts of World War II tactical games that you can think of, this game is fairly different from any of those. Some things are the same. The map looks the map will look familiar. The pieces will look a little bit familiar, but there's a lot of game mechanics here that are completely unique. I've played a few scenarios from the original box so far, as well as a couple from the first expansion, Airborne Over Europe. It's an interesting game. I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with it. It's more love than hate. So if you're Mike Denson, please don't be offended. But I really love that the designers tried something totally new in the World War II tactical genre, and I love that it's not written as some sort of screw you to ASL, which I've seen in other tactical games. But gotta say, I absolutely hate the maps and some of the scenario card layout. I'm not a fan of some of the art design here, and I'm not a fan of all the markers and turning units 45 degrees to indicate something and then turning them back to reset them. All of that's a little bit fiddly for me. But anyway, that's those aren't game-breaking quibbles. I keep playing it. The units in Last 100 Yards are familiar to people who have played World War II tactical games in the past. AFVs are single vehicles on a counter, and the infantry counters are single leaders or squads or sections. Well, sections are basically half squads, really. So if you're British and think of sections as squads, no, this is just a different kind of use of the word sections. The maps are unmounted, but they're heavy cardstock, and they're somewhat geomorphic in that they can be placed side by side in a variety of configurations to create unique maps. They're not. I don't think they're totally all four sides always geomorphic, but they're sort of like what you might remember from other games in a way. There's also some cardstock player aids, a combination turn track game status card, and about a dozen scenario cards in the initial offering. Lots of this is going to be familiar to tactical gamers. Units have a firepower number and a range and a movement allowance, all that sort of thing. But what won't be familiar is how those things are presented and the scale. And I don't mean the physical scale. That's fairly similar. But the time scale. This game is played in incredibly short time increments. Units can move generally 1 to 2 hexes per activation. So it's unlike any other tactical game I've played. Okay, so trying to explain how it all works. This might be a little to wrap your head around. It was a bit for me to wrap my head around while I was learning it, but here goes anyway. Let's see if I can explain how it works. Each player has a number of platoons. Each platoon consists of 3 squads and a leader, generally. The platoon IDs are important here, as opposed to many tactical games where the squad is the basic unit of play and there's no regard to platoon or company. Here, platoon ID is integral. Each turn starts with an activation phase. Basically, this is a dice-off between the 2 players with possible modifiers to one side or the other based on who's the attacker, etc. One player will then become the active player, and the other is the reactive player until the next initiative phase. And this is where it really gets interesting, because the 2 players, it's not like always attacker moves and one player is the attacker while the other person defends, and then the second player is the attacker while the first player defends. It's not like that at all. Whoever is the active player is basically the player with initiative is got way more opportunity to attack. So the active player, the one who's got the initiative, chooses one of his platoons to activate. He then activates the units and the leader in that platoon one by one or in stacks. The units can fire or maneuver or recover from previous status hurts that they might have had on a previous turn. And this recovering is pretty easy. It's a die roll. It's either a yes or no. The movement is straightforward with your standard movement factor costs based on terrain, but non-vehicular units, i.e. squads and leaders, can basically move 3 movement factors to a maximum of 2 hexes. So it's super short. But we'll get to the reasons for that later. As for the firing units, you make sure they have an LOS. Then they total up the total dice roll modifiers for their fire. This is interesting. You look at a chart. You know what your basic firepower is at that range. It'll adjust your firepower based on the range then. And you look at what other dice roll modifiers you have based on TEM or whatever. And then you lay an appropriate fire marker that indicates their total small arms dice roll modifiers, and you lay that on their target. So your unit is fired once they place this fire marker over on the target. Anyway, once all the units in the platoon have been activated and either recovered, moved, or fired, the active player then calls for reactions from the reactive player. And any units of the reacting player that have a line of sight to any of the activated units can react. They can then roll for recovery, they can place a fire marker, and they can even do limited movement, just a single hex. So the reacting player does all his reactions, and then any of his units that react are then marked as having reacted. As I alluded to before, there's a bit of a marker mess in this game. Once the reactive player has reacted, the active player, if he wants to, can react to any of those reactions. That doesn't happen all the time or even often. It depends on the scenario. Quite often it's just the active player goes and then the other player reacts. But after that second player reacts, the first player can react to the reactions. If he wishes, or if they wish. It goes back and forth like this until one side doesn't want to react anymore, and finally that segment, that activation is over. All the units that were originally activated or which reacted you make sure they're all marked as having been used, and then they can't react or act again this phase. Then the active player chooses his next platoon to activate, and he uses any of that platoon's units that didn't react to the reactions, for lack of a better word. So he goes through the same thing. He moves or recovers or fires them, calls for reactions again, and the defending player does his reactions. It all repeats just like the first platoon. The only difference here is that the second platoon may have already used some of its squads if they'd reacted to the reacting player's reactions. That's a mouthful, but I hope you get the idea. As well, when the reacting player is reacting to the first player's actions with this second platoon, the reactive player will now have a lot of units that have already reacted, so they can't react again. Each unit can only react or act once. So anyway, after that series of reactions, it's on to the third platoon if there is one, and fourth, etc., till all the platoons have been activated and all the reactions called for. Once all those moves and reactions are done, then we resolve all the fire. So there's going to be all these small arms dice roll modifier markers all over the place on everything that's been moved. And if the reactive player moves one of his units in a reaction, the small arms, the SADRM marker moves with it. Anyway, these have been moved. They follow the units all over the place, and you roll using the indicated dice roll modifier to get a number that you check versus the target unit's cohesion number, which is sort of like a morale value in other games. And once you check versus the cohesion number using the net or the total DRMs, and the target's either going to become disrupted or suffer a casualty, which is basically take a half-step loss, or in most cases probably suffer no effect. Once all the small arms dice roll modifier attacks have been rolled for, any units that moved into an enemy hex and survived that movement, they get to engage in assault or melee. Hence the game's title reference, the last 100 yards you need to close with the enemy. So you resolve that. There's a chart for how to resolve close combat. Once all the fire and all the assaults have been resolved, you roll for time lapse. So there's no set amount of turns before the game ends. There's a set amount of time before the game ends, and you don't know how much time each turn will take. As well, each side has a casualty limit that if they go over the casualty limit, that could end the game as well. But otherwise, the game ends when a certain amount of time, plus or minus the difference in these casualties, is reached. And then you once the time limit is up, you check how well you've done in terms of your objectives and your casualties, and you see which player wins. So you can see that the whole idea of opportunity fire in this game is a very different thing from other tactical games. There's no stopping for defensive fire, but at the same time, the moves are tiny, so it's almost like moving. It's almost like you're constantly having an opportunity for defensive fire. The time scale is so short, units only move at most 2 hexes. As well, it's worth reiterating how the initiative is critical, because it's very hard to attack when you're on the reacting side. But generally in this game, attackers will get a positive DRM to the initiative roll, but just not enough to guarantee them constant initiative. So if you're the attacker, you've got to be ready for some turns when the defender is going to be kind of taking it to you and dictating the pace and the flow of the game. So that's the basics. There's also mortars and AFVs and whatnot. There's plenty more to go, but that's the basics, the nuts and bolts of the infantry game. I should have mentioned that leaders give small bonuses for recovering disrupted units and bonuses for other actions as well. And plus, they definitely can provide a bonus in assault or melee. So, having played all of that, the question is, how does it all feel? How does it all work? It's interesting. It's the time scale makes for a very different feel from other tactical games where you might move a squad, 4 to 8 hexes. This 1-2 hex movement is very different. Coupled with the unique reaction system, I find that the opportunity fire works really well here. There's nothing remotely like the old Panzerbusch syndrome where units could jump from cover to cover, because cover just isn't that you can't get from cover to cover in 1 to 2 hexes. And at the same time, it's not a game of move and having the other guy stop and shoot you and then move some more. That's a very I don't know. The reaction system makes this game like no other, and it also makes it very interactive, and both players are engaged all the time. For the most part, I really like how these new ideas work, both for the fire and maneuver. The initiative system really hits home that old adage about no plan surviving first contact with the enemy. It's good. I like it enough to have coughed up for the base game and both expansions right on their first printing, if not on the P500. So I'm definitely a fan of the game so far. But that's not to say I don't have a few grumbles. It's there's a few things that are a burr in my saddle here. For one thing, it really takes some getting used to. There's some things that once you play it, they become second nature, but they're definitely not intuitive for people who've been playing a lot of tactical games in the past. For example, the small arms fire table, where normally in most tactical games you might be looking at columns that are based on the firepower of the weapons or weapons being used or the squads being used. But instead, this table is divided into columns based on the maximum range of the weapon. This is unlike anything you've seen before, perhaps, and I gotta admit, I missed that being spelled out in the rules, so it took me a bit initially to figure out how exactly that table worked. I couldn't figure out what those column totals referred to, as the columns are just numbered at the maximum ranges of the weapons, but I don't know, maybe I just missed it, but in my initial looking, I don't recall those columns being listed as being the ranges. I probably just missed it. Anyway, it was totally not intuitive. Not a big thing, because once you get the hang of it, you really see how it works, and it's quite a beautiful little system. As well, the game is based on platoons, which is great. So the scenario cards have to tell you which platoons to use. But the scenario cards, sometimes it'll say X company, first and second platoons, meaning you're just going to use those platoons. Or sometimes it just says X company, meaning without spelling it out that you need to use all 3 platoons from that company. And then for the Germans, it uses a slightly different nomenclature from the Americans. So the wording is just slightly different. I don't know, it just keeps you a little bit off balance. You get used to what all this means as you get more familiar with the game, for sure, but it just feels a bit unnecessary. There's a big part of me that just goes, just show us what counters we need to play the scenario and let us play. But like I said, you get really used to that. It's not the end of the world. My biggest gripe with this game is with the map boards. 3 things bug me here. First, and this is common to a few of the newer tactical games, the hexes are very large, which in effect makes each map board small. There's less if the actual dimensions of the map boards are kind of the same in all games. If you make the hexes big, that means fewer hexes across, fewer hexes long. So there's just a lot less room for maneuver when the hexes are big like this. I don't mind stacking counters. I know some gamers don't like it. It's not a big deal for me. But worse, second, there's a strange bit of artistry in these maps where sometimes the map art is meaningful and sometimes it's just decorative. For example, if a hex is mostly covered in the woods design, it's a woods hex and it gets that terrain effects modifier. But if there's just a little dash of woods hex design here and there in a hex, it's not a woods hex. It's just ornamental. This is terrible, awful. I wish they hadn't done it. Because on top of that, the woods design, it's not particularly realistic. They're not trying to make it look like woods. It's clearly not meant to be. It's just a bit of generic woods-looking stuff that's pasted in here and there. So the extra bits don't really help with game immersion or enhance the game in any way. They just distract and make you constantly wonder what's woods and what isn't, and what is the terrain in the hex that I'm looking at. And then finally, the hills. The hills in this game are just whack. They made the decision to delineate the hills by contour lines. I don't know, I guess that's a good idea. There's heavy contour lines, which denote actual hill levels, a level 1 hill versus a level 2 hill, etc. And then there's thin contour lines that depict gradations between the levels. Visually, it's just a mess. It's very hard to really envision. Not to envision, it's easy to say, oh, that's a hill, but it's very hard to envision the LOS. Getting rid of the thin lines would help. They only block LOS between units on the same level. That all feels a bit fiddly for the visual clutter that they produce. As well, given the distance each gradation apparently represents, if you were to draw these hills out, they're incredibly steep, very high, and very not gentle up and down. They're incredibly steep. I saw the designer mention on BGG that maybe each contour line should represent less of an altitude change, which will help make them make them more like real hills, but still a mess to use. Sure, the maps look a little bit like topographical maps with all those contour lines, but they're not fun to play on. As always, give me more function at the expense of form. These just draw the maps. Just draw the hills on the map, and I'd be a lot happier. But those gripes about the woods and the woods and the hills don't make me quit playing the game. I'm enjoying it. I will also say that it's the game so far is very American centered. So we've had the base game and 2 expansions so far, and they all feature the U.S. as the Allied side. a bit of a drag for those of us who are yearning for the Commonwealth forces. I think the Russians may finally be up next in the third expansion, but who knows if we'll ever see if we'll ever see any Brits, let alone any Canadians or Anzac units, or Italians or French or whatever. Anyway, lest it sound like I hate the game, let me say again, I've bought everything available for it so far, and I continue to play it. There's a pretty decent Vassal module that gets regular updates, and despite the interactive nature of the game, it works very well for Vassal PBEM. So I don't know, maybe if ASL just seems too big of a lift for you, but you really want to try something out in the World War II tactical space, I think give the Last 100 Yards a try. I think it might be a good place to get your tactical fix. So much for games. At this point in the podcast, I'd like to give a tip of the hat to something that I've enjoyed in the last while, or something that I'm interested in that I might want to pass along to listeners. So if you're a podcast listener and also a history fan, I bet you've probably heard of Mike Duncan's excellent History of Rome podcast, or his equally excellent Revolutions podcast. But I have to say, Mike gets plenty of cheese, so I want to pump the tires of someone equally as good, but less well known. I suggest you check out the History of England podcast by David Crowther. He goes into the same deep dives as Mike Duncan, starts at the very beginning of English history, works his way along. He started this podcast way back in 2010 with the Anglo-Saxons in the 3rd century, and he's been going at it steadily for 12 years, and he's up to the 1600s. I've been working away at listening at it to it for years, off and on, and I'm just up to the point, the episodes on the Wars of the Roses. Just fantastic. Particularly gave me some new insights into Richard III, which I really appreciated. Anyway, Crowther has a quick wit. He can be very funny, much more humor than the History of Rome podcast, for example. He never takes it too seriously. He really enjoys it, and that really comes across. At the same time, it's straight up, real history podcasts. Also, this is he's got a 200 or 300 episodes out there, or whatever it is. If you don't want to take on the whole thing, you can just dive into any chunk of English history that interests you. All the episodes are available. There's nothing behind a paywall or anything like that. So that's highly recommended. Again, that's the History of England podcast by David Crowther. I'll try to put a note in the show notes there too, or a link in the show notes for that. Well, I already had my rant at the top of the show when I talked about the gripes about the new release of Mark Herman's Pacific War. So no old man shouting at the clouds at the end this time. Instead, what I'd like to know is what games you're interested in. This episode, I featured a brand new game as well as a game that is still pretty new to me. Pretty new to everyone, I think. But I'd also like to feature old Avalon Hill and SPI games for sure. There's got to be a couple generations of gamers that haven't had a lot of contact with games from the first golden age of wargaming, so I definitely would like to include those. Drop me a line at the website or on Twitter. Let me know what you're into, what games you like to hear about. If you only like to hear about what's new, or if you like to just hear games you're already familiar with discussed as well. So that's it for this episode. Thanks for listening, and you can look for us at pushingcardboard.com on the web, where you can comment on anything you hear here. And we now have forums where you can discuss anything from the podcast or individual games or wargaming in general. I'd really love to hear your feedback on the podcast, as well as what's interesting you about the hobby these days. So again, pushingcardboard.com for the web, or you can follow me at cardboardpusher on Twitter. If you've enjoyed it, give us a rating on your favorite podcast app, and tell a buddy to check us out as well. Happy gaming, and we'll talk to you next time.